used to have a customer who would come in here, and he worked in a very stressful job, and he would come in on his lunch break and he would say to me, "Is it okay if I just walk around and look at the books? It always calms me." And he would do that and then go back to work. And I can see some of the lads that hang around here now, though they've never said that to me, that when they come in and are just near the books, it calms them. And that's the power of books. I'm Wally O'Neill. I'm the owner of Red Books here in Wexford, St. Peter's Square, one of Ireland's largest independent bookstores. Prior to 2009, I worked in the construction industry, and I would spend all my free time in places like Reader's Paradise, the Book Centre, any bookstore I could find. I would go to fairs looking for books. It was a long time love with books. And 2009 was kind of a defining year for me. My daughter Danielle was born, and it was also the year that our construction business just went wallop. We hung on for as long as we could, and that was it. And around October that year, I suddenly found myself unemployed for the first time in my life, and that dawning realization that I have absolutely zero skills here. I don't know what I'm doing, and I've got this kid. So it was scary times, and there was a number of years where I went from kind of one job to another, trying to pick up new skills, and I ended up working as a courier. And doing that, I met a guy called John, who is a former bookseller himself. He would have owned a lot of shops in the UK in pre-Amazon 1980s, and he now supplies books to other independent bookstores. So one of my jobs would have been delivering books for him. I've done a couple of book fairs, and in coming up to Christmas 2016, I hired, it was supposed to be temporary at the time, a small shed in Bridgetown for the local Christmas fair. And I said I'd keep it till Christmas anyway and see what would happen. And that's Red Books, the original Red Books. So we were in Bridgetown for 3 years. It seems a lot longer now, even though it was a wonderful experience, a great time. The bookshop in Bridgetown was extremely small. I think it was maybe 20 feet by 30 feet. It was incredibly small anyway, and we kind of stacked books right up to the ceiling. But maybe after the first week or two, we noticed people were hanging around the shop, which is insane because there was only enough room for 2 or 3 people in it at any time. But you would always have people sitting on the wall outside, people who would just turn up for a chat, turn up to get a book, turn up with coffee. And I started noticing there's something else going on here. This isn't just about books. This is people who have nowhere to go, who obviously are missing some sort of social connection. Over those 3 years, we built this kind of a community. We set up a writers group in Bridgetown. Again, we thought, Jesus, are we being pretentious here? Is anyone going to come to a writers group in Bridgetown? And it took off. It was very successful. We used the local AOH hall, and we even published our first book in 2018 with the help of Sean Gibbons and Emma Ennis, who acted as editors, and Fintan Murphy, called Some Write with Glue. In 2019, August 2019, we moved into Wexford town, and we thought, bigger premises, we'll get more people in, we'll get more books in, and then COVID hit. So in hindsight, we probably wouldn't have moved in, but it was the best thing that could have happened to us. So we would have published that book ourselves in 2018, and I suppose after that, I would have always thought there's scope here. in 2020, I'd imagine just after the first lockdown, 4 writers who were hanging around the shop in here and myself decided to set up a publishing cooperative called Redbooks Press. And the first book we published was Every Second by Dan Finn. It's a brilliant book. He described it as a cross between Raymond Chandler and hardcore sci-fi, which it was. And since then, we've published 43 books, counting anthologies. So we have 2 in-house journals. One is called Wexford Women Writing Undercover, of which we've now published 5 editions. And that's obviously all women from Wexford and beyond. And it's edited by Deirdre McGarry. And then we have our flagship anthology, The Wexford Bohemian, which is now edited by my cousin, Alana Hamill, a gifted writer herself. And The Bohemian was the first one we really started. It was kind of the thing we pushed at the start. There was a guy called Zeff Ryder who was hanging out in the shop. He would have ran a lot of music and writing events here. And myself and Zeff were we were very interested in the Beatniks. We were interested in Bukowski. We were interested in what had happened in City Lights in San Francisco. So we set up the Wexford Bohemian, and Zeff would have edited the first 2 himself, and he's now living in Portugal, where he's opened a bookshop called Livros Tintos, which he tells me is the closest to a Portuguese translation of Redbooks. So we've just brought out issue 6 of the Wexford Bohemian, and it's sold out in 48 hours, so the demand is there for homegrown writers. As I mentioned before, we started a writers group when we were in Bridgetown, and we would meet in the local AOH hall because the original Redbooks was so small. When we moved in here, we were very keen to start having events in the bookshop straight away, so we brought the writers group in here, and we started doing what we called live lit events, which Zeff would present, and it would be a mixture of music and kind of homages to our favourite writers. So we would have done an Irvine Welsh night, we would have done a Charles Bukowski night, and that ran until the first COVID lockdown. But I was keen to get more things going, and over time, a lot of the events kind of developed organically. People would approach us and say, how about we do this? So we ended up with knitting groups, various different craft groups, art classes, writers groups, book clubs, and of course we've very successful music nights. So a music night called Driftwood at the moment, presented by Shane Kenny, which is going really well. And then we have a monthly open mic called Outspoken, which is aimed solely at spoken word and poets. An amazing group that meets here every second Saturday called the Wexford Youth Literary Society. Just a fantastic group of young people, set up 2 years ago. Heidi, one of the girls who set it up, has now gone off to Trinity. But the things that these kids discuss, the things that they read, it just makes you feel good about the future. I think nobody else has come into the shop since I opened here and asked for books by people like Henry Miller, except for these kids. You know, they're reading great stuff, a lot of highbrow stuff. So it's good, and obviously we've books for everybody, and every week it changes. The bestseller changes. So we sell a lot of crime novels. We have the largest poetry selection in the country at this stage. Poetry is always a little bit more of a difficult seller, though. We sell an awful lot of the classics, and we find that younger people are reading the classics, and the classics themselves change. So Dickens is not very popular at the moment. Thomas Hardy mightn't be very popular at the moment, but then the Russians are extremely popular. So we can't keep Dostoevsky or Tolstoy on out there. You know, Jane Austen will always sell. The Brontes will always sell. And every now and then the BBC will make a series. So like Thomas Hardy, as we mentioned, I think one of his has been made into a series again, and that'll introduce people to Hardy. So it's a constant turnaround. It's just having those books when people go look for them. The very first book I can remember reading was a really, really battered copy of Peter Pan, a kind of Disney-fied version of it. But I loved that book, and I'd carry it with me everywhere. And I actually came across a similar copy of it recently, and I couldn't believe it because it's the first time I've seen the book in years. But I would read it over and over and over again. I was a huge fan of the Beano annuals as well, which were handed down to me by my older cousins. So I would always have a Beano annual that was maybe 10 years out of date. And I loved the humour in that. My father was a big reader himself, so he would have introduced me to a lot of the classics. So I would have been reading children's versions of David Copperfield, Swiss Family Robinson's, Robinson Crusoe. I really loved Around the World in 80 Days. That was a book that I just read and reread. And then, I suppose, books always lead you to something else. So I would have read Gulliver's Travels back in the day. And I was just the artwork on those children's books of this giant man and his hair being tied down by little people. And of course, when I read that children's version of Gulliver's Travels, it was a simple adventure story. And now when I read Gulliver's Travels as an adult, it's this great satire. So they would lead you to something else. I read Jules Verne, Journey to the Centre of the Earth, and that led me to science fiction, people like Isaac Asimov and Arthur C. Clarke, and all of that, it opened up a new world. And I suppose the likes of Gulliver's Travels would have led me down. One of my preferred choice of reading is always kind of black humour and dark satire. So books like Catch-22 by Joseph Heller, A Confederacy of Dunces by O'Toole Kennedy, just those books, Slaughterhouse-Five by Kurt Vonnegut, they really pack a punch. They're able to say something about society in the best possible way, I think, by making fun of it. We say that at any one time we have 250,000 books here, and that's a big, big estimate because no one's going to go and count them all. But thankfully there's a big turnover. We've a loyal customer base. We get a lot of people coming in here, particularly in the summer when people are on holidays. They'll come in and they'll stock up, and there's obviously a lot of books moving out that way. And like I said, we're getting books in every day. I think the secret is to keep refreshing the stock. So we may not have the A to Z thing, and we never will. We may not be structurally organized that way, and it all exists kind of haphazardly in my head. But we'll always have books that you probably won't find anywhere else, including Amazon. I would say that I'm the youngest or the second youngest bookseller at the independent fairs, which is a tragedy because I'm not young. But I think we can change that. I would have always loved books myself, but I would never have thought about being able to sell them. I just would have expected that you would have had to go and do some special education process maybe or something, but it's not like that at all. It's really the key thing you need to be a bookseller is to love books, and that's what it's about. And I know there's hundreds of thousands of people out there who love books and who would make great booksellers, and we have to bring bookshops, independent bookshops, back into every town in the country, because they play a role that's more than just selling books. They play a role as a hub in the community, as a hub for arts, as a hub for people, as a hub for charity. I think every bookseller secretly writes themselves. I think anybody who likes books holds the desire to be a writer. I do write, not enough. I write for fun and relaxation. I've had a few little things published. That first book I mentioned that we did in Bridgetown, Summary with Glue. I had actually I won't call it a historical article, but a pseudo-historical article published in a book for Liam this year, which was a tribute book that was done in the memory of Wexford historian Liam Gall, and it was brought out by Brian Siggins and Nicky Rossiter. So I had a piece in that as well. But I love it, and anyone who loves books will probably love writing as well. Well, when I set up the bookshop first in Bridgetown, I was one of those people who thought that it'll just be me in the bookshop reading books all day and selling a few, hopefully, to customers who would come in and just give me money and leave. But that's not what it's about at all. A bookshop is about books, but it's also about the people who inhabit the bookshop and come in on a daily basis. And we found communities developing, various different communities developing around the bookshop over the years. And we found a lot of lost people coming into the bookshop. We were lucky enough to be able to, I'm lucky enough to be able to make my living out of this. I'm able to send my child to school out of this. I'm able to feed my family out of this. So at some point, you think, I have a responsibility to give something back as well. So we set up the Sanctuary Initiative as part of Wexford People Helping People, a local charity. It's a mental wellness project, an anti-loneliness project. So we run a lot of events, including a mental wellness cafe here on a Monday night. We run art therapy, meditation. But the most important thing is we source and pay for counselling for anybody who feels they need it. And it's obviously very difficult to get counselling, and price can always be prohibitive for people. So that's really what it's about. And it's about trying to get people to come in and know that they're welcome. You know, I think we've all experienced mental health, and the mental health crisis in some way over the last 20 years. We've all probably lost people to the spectre of suicide. A lot of us have suffered from depression. So I think things like this are really important. And a bookshop is a good base for this. I think the big statistic was that was put around was from 2008, maybe up to 2016, because of Amazon and the recession, 1,000 independent bookshops were lost in Ireland and the UK. Now, I think it's turning the other way. The tide is turning. We lost so many shops. There's obviously more room for the shops that are left there now. But also Amazon has kind of shown its true face at this stage. The days of getting penny books on Amazon are over. And they've also, they're practicing a form of censorship on Amazon at the moment, where certain books that don't suit their algorithm are removed. And this, it's a different type of censorship. It's not like how we saw books being banned before, because it's simply an economic model. So I will constantly have people coming in here looking for works by Irish writers that may have lost popularity and have just been scrubbed. They're no longer available to buy online. And that's a terrible tragedy, you know, because particularly in a country like this where we have such a rich canon of great writers. And I think people are seeing through that. So we know as young people, especially people under 25 who grew up with the internet, grew up knowing what Amazon was, who grew up with Kindles and they weren't some sort of great novelty, would much rather have a paperback book in their hand than a Kindle. So I think there's great hope for the future. I have this strange idea about bookshops, independent bookshops like this one. And I would have spent a lot of time in other people's bookshops, and I still do. And I always feel that they are reflections of the inside of the bookseller's mind, which is why you can't really turn these into chain stores. We briefly had a second shop in Gorey, and it just didn't work. And I think the reason it didn't work is because you have to be there yourself. You have to be putting a lot of your essence into the shop, into the daily life of it. So if you walk around this shop, you'll find there's narrow little walkways. You'll find there's books cluttered. You'll find there's all sorts of random wacky pictures and statues and things around the place. And I think all of it is stuff that I might have accumulated, and it's a representation of me. So it's a very personal experience, curating the bookshop. It's not like a high street clothes shop or an eatery or any place like that. It's something different.